finding the perfect lens can be very tricky. If you're shooting regularly, you shoot photo, you shoot video, you're going to want a good lens to keep up with your photos. So what I've done is, over the years, I've been able to pick out a selection of lenses that cover most of the remit. What I mean by that is, it's always impossible to find the right lens. But if you've got a selection covering your requirements, you'll actually be a lot better. If you do a lot of further away photography, you're going to be looking at something like a zoom lens. This is a telephoto lens. This has got the capability of going up to 200 millimeters. Fashion catwalks, you'll see a lot of people using these type of lenses. I use it with a full frame body, but I also use it with a crop sensor body. So example cameras that would meet that would be things like the T7, the Canon camera, 2000D. T7 is known as 2000D in different countries. You've got the earlier models, the 700D, 650Ds. All of those cameras are crop sensor. So when you put this lens on, you get a slight extra reach distance. So the 200 would become more like a 285 or 290 or something like that. If you're looking at wide shots, then you're probably going to look at something like the middle option here, and that would be a 24-70. That allows you to zoom. If I take the hood off this, you'll see what I mean by that. So this is an extending lens. You'll see in this closer shot. That's how it extends, and that gives you the option to get wide shots and telephoto, mid telephoto. So how you look at it is, this one is a 24-70. So I'll position that here. So I've basically got 24-70 covered. The next number would be number 2, because this then covers 70-200. So I've got most of that selection covered. Then I've got a 50mm, which goes in between, which is actually on my other camera, which I normally use. So you'll see my sit down shot over there, where I'm not currently sitting, just down there. I would normally be on the 50mm, so that would be in the middle. So we've got a double option there. I'll talk about that in a second. So we've got the 24-70, we've got the 50mm sitting in between these, then I got the 70-200. So the 50mm is a good in between, because that's got a low aperture. Low aperture means if you're stuck in a low light situation, you can go down to 1.4, which lets in more light. You get a slightly brighter image, you get more background blur. This is a 2.8 lens, that is a 2.8 lens, and that gives you an idea of most of these options in cameras. So we've got that covered. Next, I've got a 100mm macro lens. This would probably sit here as well, somewhere along there, because 100mm macro lets you get closer to your item you're taking photographs of. So if I was taking a photograph of the text on here, I could get really close and still be able to focus. With some of the other lenses, they have a minimum focus range, so you have to be like a meter away or something, and then the focus, you get any closer, it's blurry. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're doing product photography, a good macro lens does very well for that, because it's a prime lens, so you get the same view every time and it looks coherent. So that's why I use a number of these. Again, don't buy all the lenses just to say you've got all the lenses. You need to buy the lens when you need it and how it works for you. I first started with the kit 18-55 lens. I used that a lot. I found out that, you know what, I wasn't able to take great photos in darker environments, which is when I just went straight into this. Because the types of photographs I was doing, I needed a solid lens, and this 2.8 70-200 lens was a good option. It's a big lens, but it does, for its purpose, you want something like this, especially when you get 2.8 aperture. The other equivalent to this is the version that is the f4 version, and that f4 version is slightly different. It's going to be good for video work, because obviously if you're hand holding f4, you've got a bit more room to crack the focus, as opposed to 2.8, which can be a bit more tricky. So that gives you an idea about the 24-70. And after that, I started doing more product photography. So I got the 100mm macro, and that served a purpose. In general rule of it is, if you're doing enough work for a particular client or shoot, you want the right gear. You'll easily get your money back 10-20 fold once you're using the right lens and the quality's there. That's the second option. The 50mm was more of a general extra option as a backup, because if you're doing photography, you want a lens that you can go to without any worry. If anything was to go wrong with that lens, or that lens is stopped working, the 50, I could still do a full shoot with the 50mm. It just means it's a prime lens, so I'll have to move a bit more to get the right shot. In addition to all of those, they're like kind of not selective, but they've got their own jobs that they do. You've got something like the 24 to 70, 2.8. There's a couple of versions in this lens. You've got the standard one, you've got the version 1, version 2, version 3. I think they've gone quite fancy now. But the lenses themselves do very well. It depends how pixel peeping you want to get and how closely you want to look at that. Because sometimes you might end up seeing a photograph that is perfectly fine. But if you go into it and pixel peep and compare it with other lenses, some people might not be happy with that. But then that's more generally the photographers than the clients that tend to do that. So don't worry about that. So looking at this, that's a good all-round option. You'll see I always have this lens attached on my camera because it's a good all-rounder. You might think to yourself, why do you need all these hoods? Normally when I'm doing photographs, they tend to be in an environment where people do a lot of flash, and I don't want that flash getting into my camera and giving me funny little lights and blurs and what's the word, you know, when you get the cinematic blurs. Yeah, I'm thinking of a word, but I can't think of it. But these basically stop that coming into your camera. And also as an extra thing, if you bump it somewhere, there's like an extra protection as well. So your lens element won't get hit. Because normally these are like mounted. I have spider holsters, so I have 2 cameras. So it's an extra option. I don't always use the hoods, but you can do. So that gives you an idea of different lenses and what you can look at and think about. These were all Canon lenses, but if you've got a different camera, you don't have to worry. You can actually get adapters for these that adapt them to a different mounting system, like Sony or Fujifilm or something. So a lot of people do buy Canon lenses and then use them on other bodies. So that's giving you a quick overview of that.